Alright, let's talk about how the periodical press, what we now think of as newspapers and journals, first came into being. This is one of those topics examiners love, so let's go step by step. The very first periodical dates back to Venice in 1536. It was called the Gazzetta, yes, that's where the word gazette comes from. And it was basically a manuscript newsletter reporting war news. This has been asked in exam. England was a bit slower to catch on. Under Queen Elizabeth, news sheets circulated but only irregularly. The first real breakthrough came in 1622 with Nathaniel Butter's Weekly News. This was England's first regular newspaper, and that title has been tested in exam. It stuck to foreign news only, no editorials, no essays, just straightforward reporting. During the Civil War, journalism heated up. Both sides used newspapers as propaganda. The Royalists had the Mercurius Anglicus, while the Parliamentarians countered with titles like Mercurius Pragmaticus and Mercurius Politicus. So you can already see the press being shaped by political conflict. After the Restoration, newspapers grew popular but also became politically troublesome. In 1662, the government clamped down, suspending private publications and creating an official paper called the Public Intelligencer. Soon after, in 1665, the Oxford Gazette appeared. A year later, it moved to London and became the London Gazette. That paper is still running today, and yes, its founding date is often asked in exam. By the 1680s, the press became livelier. Freedom of the press was restored in 1682, and suddenly you had a flood of Mercuries and other sheets. Advertisements even began to appear, for example, in the Jockey's Intelligencer of 1683. The first daily newspaper arrived in 1702, the Daily Courant. It lasted until 1735, making it the first true daily in English history. By the early 18th century, politics was driving the press. Whigs and Tories each had their own outlets. Daniel Defoe's Review, launched in 1704, was a Whig paper, while the Tories ran the Examiner with contributors like Jonathan Swift and Matthew Prior. Both were political, but they often used satire to make their points. These exact titles, Review and Examiner, have been asked in exam. And then comes the real turning point. Richard Steele's Tatler in 1709. It started as a kind of newspaper but quickly expanded. Steele used it to report on news and gossip from the clubs and coffee houses of London. Very soon, he and Joseph Addison shifted the focus to short, witty, literary essays. This blend of journalism with literature became the real hallmark of the periodical press. Addison and Steele took it even further with the Spectator in 1711. This paper made the daily essay its main attraction, shaping taste, manners, and morality. The Spectator is often described as the first great literary journal, and it is always a hot spot in exam questions. Steele wasn't done. Later, in 1718, he launched the Plebeian, an early political periodical that continued the tradition of mixing politics and prose. Again, this title has been asked in exam. So, from the Gazzetta of Venice to the Spectator in London, the rise of the periodical press shows how news reporting gradually turned into a literary and political force. And by the early 18th century, the essay had become the star of the show. Let's talk about the essay, one of the most flexible and enduring literary forms in English. Samuel Johnson once defined the essay as a short, unmethodical, personal piece. In other words, not a treatise, not a formal book, but something lighter, more direct and more personal. And that definition itself has been asked in exam. The roots of the essay in English go all the way back to the Elizabethans. Writers like Lodge, Lyly and Green experimented with prose sketches, and Sidney's Apologies for Poetry in 1580 is often mentioned as an early essay form. But the real turning point came with Francis Bacon. Born in 1561, Bacon is considered the first true English essayist. His essays, influenced by Montaigne's French collection from 1580, were brief, sharp, and full of worldly wisdom. They covered themes like friendship, ambition, and truth. But, and here's the key, they were not personal. Bacon is detached, philosophical, almost aphoristic. His essays are about what to think, not how he himself felt. That distance is why examiners often emphasize that Bacon's essays lack intimacy. After Bacon, Abraham Cowley helped carry the essay forward. His essays, especially ones on familiar topics like myself, are more discursive and relaxed, less formal than Bacon's. You could say Cowley is the bridge between Bacon and the later essayists like Addison, and yes, this connection has been highlighted in exam. Another branch came from the character writers, people like Hall, Earle, and Thomas Overbury. Overbury's sketches, like The Tinker, were short, witty portraits of everyday types. These character sketches gave the essay a humorous, observational quality which would later influence the periodical writers. Now, some works of the 17th century are often mistaken for essays but don't really qualify. Dryden's essay of dramatic poesy from 1666, for example, is more a dialogue or a treatise than a true essay. The same goes for Locke's essay concerning human understanding in 1690, which is a massive philosophical treatise. Even Temple's essay on poetry in 1685 is more formal than personal, though it's closer to the essay form than Locke or Dryden. The real flowering of the essay came with the rise of the periodical press. Journals like the Tatler and the Spectator, founded by Addison and Steele, turned the essay into a social and literary form. Addison in particular polished it into something witty, moral, and elegant, shaping how people thought and talked in coffee houses. Steele, Swift, and even Pope contributed essays to these periodicals, giving the form variety and reach. Defoe, too, wrote in a wide-ranging journalistic essay style. So, if Bacon gave us wisdom and Cowley added charm, it was Addison and Steele who truly defined the English essay as we know it. Short, elegant, conversational, flexible. That foundation carried forward into the essayists of the 19th century and beyond. And while essays were rising, prose narrative was also taking shape. Allegory was still popular. Think of Swift's Gulliver's Travels, where story and satire blend together. Defoe, meanwhile, was moving us closer to the modern novel with Robinson Crusoe. Swift's allegory always served his satire, while Defoe leaned into realism. Both directions fed into the emergence of the English novel, which we'll explore in the next stage. Finally, don't forget the vast field of miscellaneous prose. This period gave us religious, political, and philosophical works, many of them satirical. Swift was a master of political prose, with the Drapier's Letters and A Tale of a Tub. Bolingbroke's The Spirit of Patriotism was another key political tract. Bishop Berkeley offered philosophy in works like Alciphron, while Steele wrote religious prose such as The Christian Hero. That title has been directly asked in exam, so keep it handy. So, in the age of prose, the essay rose from Bacon's brief reflections, through Cowley's discursive style, to Addison and Steele's polished periodical form, all while satire, allegory, and political prose kept English readers debating, laughing, and learning.